into my presentation on the World Cup and the media influences involved, and also just the general global sports culture. So when discussing this topic, I think that the first thing that needs to actually be talked about is how media shapes public interest in sports. According to one of the articles we read by Derlovich, Obranov, and Milahovic, I believe is how you say their names, and I apologize if I got those wrong, but according to them, media doesn't simply report sporting events, it actively helps create public interest by making sports more accessible and emotionally engaging. The U.S. Against the World documentary I think it's a really perfect example of this, as it very clearly, I was only able to watch, the first 2 episodes or so, but it was able to very clearly create buzz about the World Cup, and just get people more excited. I'm definitely someone, like I think most Americans, as was discussed in the documentary, that is I'm not a huge soccer fan, I'm classic American. I love football, basketball, baseball, but soccer is just honestly whatever in my mind. So I think that it especially makes people who aren't traditionally soccer fans like myself more interested, because it shows how that sport specifically relates to us in the U.S. more than what we typically feel regularly in our country. And I'll go into a few ways that happened later on. The documentary also creates a very compelling story for the preparation that the U.S. men's team has been going through to get to the point that they are in now. And it starts with them failing to qualify for the 2018 World Cup. And I think that it did a good job in making me, and by me, I mean the audience, feel more connected to the individual players and coaches by helping it to relate to us, like in our homes and our everyday lives, and it therefore made it feel more emotional for us. When we're watching it, it feels like, oh man, that could be me, that could be my friend, that could be my neighbor, participating in this very large national or worldwide event. So then, per the article, this is not the only type of media that plays a role, but this was just one. This is just the one that I used in my example. Social media, as well as any kind of media, plays the exact same role. The article that I had mentioned before also brings up how highlights via social media are a really big thing with how media shapes public interest in sports, as they show quick feats and skill that pique people's interest and begin discussions. This leads into the idea of symbolic interactionism, as these media stories help to create meaning for people. Like was read about with Michael Jordan, and how Nike and the media really shaped him into the hero, in quotes, the hero that he became. People don't just watch sports, they learn about their heroes through the media that surrounds the sports. So to continue on, sports also reflects culture, nationalism, and politics. There were several instances of this in the documentary that I want to talk about, but I think it all points to the idea of functionalism. Some of the quotes that I heard were, I'm just a kid from New York, house full of immigrants, football is in my blood, it's part of my culture. And the captain also said, there's a reason you're here. Everybody's reason could be different. There's one common theme. We're here to represent this patch, as he pointed to the America patch on the jersey, like in my slide picture. And then the coach also said, there were 2 major things that led me to this job. The first was the honor of coaching your national team. He also said, how do we play a game that represents who we are, the United States? That has a very significant nationalistic idea behind it with those 2 things that he was saying just there. So then these quotes from the documentary, they fully capture the idea of functionalism, as what functionalism is it's all about people being brought together and teaching different values. In this instance, it's a lot of nationalistic values, but it certainly is bringing together. Therefore, it is very functionalistic. let's see. And then going on, because the World Cup is such a massive event around the world, you really have to discuss the differences between American and global sports culture. At the beginning of the U.S. Against the World documentary, one of the players was discussing how Hershey, Pennsylvania in particular, is a perfect example of how the rest of the world feels about soccer. They don't really care for or pay attention to it, like I was discussing just a little bit ago. I related to that, like I have never been to Hershey, Pennsylvania. I barely even been to Pennsylvania, just a kid from southern Utah, but it was the exact same, like obviously it was played in high school, but overall it's not something that's really highly cared about. And so I think that is very reflective, is my point. Let's see. The rest of the world is certainly not the same. Later in the documentary, there was an inspirational Tom Brady quote on the wall of the hotel meeting room that the team met at for the 2022 World Cup. And I don't think any other country besides, ours, and maybe there's some smaller ones out there, but I don't think that there's any other country that really would have a quote from an athlete from another sport on their wall at the biggest event for a different sport, if that makes sense. But yeah. Anyway, to continue on, that idea perfectly leads me to the idea of the World Cup being a very shared global experience. This idea is really, honestly, very simple at the core. Sports bring people together, and I think it's really cool, though, to see how a few sporting events like the Olympics and World Cup can just really bring the entire world together, granting a shared experience to those who watch it or talk about it. It's definitely a reflection on functionalism, I think, as the whole idea of functionalism is that people get brought together. Right here are a few pictures that, funnily enough, I was just in England for the last week or so, and we decided, we had been driving around one night, and we knew that the World Cup was happening, obviously, but like I said, I'm not a huge soccer fan, so I wasn't crazy aware of it. But being in England, obviously, that's a very big thing there. And so we were maybe we should go and watch a game. And then we were driving around, we wanted to go watch a game, maybe at a pub or something, just to kind of see. And we were driving around, we were driving home one night, the night of the England game, and we passed this pub, and it's packed inside. As you can see, it was packed outside. And so we were all right, we have to go to that pub because that will be such a cool experience to see what supporting a huge event here is with the people that are such big fans, because none of the people I was with we weren't really soccer fans, but we just wanted to experience that with the people. And unfortunately, it ended up being the game that was a 0-0 draw, as I guess soccer fans or English soccer fans would say. And so there was definitely some excitement, lots of beers and cheers and oohs and ahs and disappointment going around, but it was, so we were really hoping to see England get the win so we could kind of feel that hype around it. But it was still really cool to go to this event, to feel that buzz that was in the air from people who are watching it, thousands of miles away, ironically in our home area. But it was very much a shared global experience. I firsthand got to experience that this week, which I thought was a very, very unique thing to be able to do. But going back to the documentary, a couple of the quotes that I heard from the goalie, he said, "The World Cup is a life-changing moment with 5 billion people watching the games. That is a very large chunk of the world." Then the coach said, "You're the only game going on in the world." Because when the World Cup happens, only one game happens right at a time, So he says, literally the whole world stops to watch these games. So it's just my thought that with my own experience and then with these quotes, clearly people are being brought together through the World Cup. All right, then I think it's important to also discuss the media narratives that surround international sports. In the, and again, I don't know how to fully pronounce this, but Dowdy and colleagues' article, it discussed how different media organizations portrayed the exact same World Cup, specifically the 2022 World Cup, in extremely different ways, you know. They talked about how many Western media outlets discussed it through the lens of conflict theory, the idea that sports reflect unequal opportunities for different groups than other groups. And then on the other hand, the article talked about how some of the media groups that were from the area where the World Cup was being held used the opportunity to bring up ideas like nationalism, historical significance of the event, and a lot of just like items with the local culture. And I think these are a little bit more symbolic interactionism viewpoints, but it was specifically for the people and things that are happening in that area. And so it was interesting to kind of study and see the differences between, that local to us, or like local to us, the Western narratives versus, those the local to the event in 2022 narratives of the media, as they were, quite different. Okay, so then to finish off with, there is definitely a very significant representation of globalization in the World Cup. And I think that is honestly an understatement to say, as it's almost a perfectly globalized event. I was a social studies teacher, so I've dealt a lot with globalization, with the concept of it. And I've always kind of viewed it through the historical lens with how much it impacts our world today, but I've never really studied it through the sports lens, and so it was very, very interesting for me to be able to do that through this, through the World Cup, through this opportunity. And like I said, it's probably the best, if not the second best, with the Olympics, example of globalization in sports. Media plays a massive role in this, as it allows matches to be broadcast worldwide, and by creating online communities where fans interact regardless of geographic location. At any point, people can constantly be going online and discussing, the highlights, as I mentioned before, or the game as a whole, or, how something was announced during the game. Or there's been a lot of videos on social media lately of Japanese people coming to the U.S. for the World Cup and trying Texas barbecue for the first time. That is a very globalized idea that we can do that in today's world. And so, obviously the World Cup is very globalized. And then all three perspectives, functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism, I think are all shown in this. For functionalism, globalization allows the World Cup to create social cohesion on an international scale. People from different backgrounds, they get to participate in a shared experience, celebrate together, and develop a sense of global community through sport. I think then for conflict theory, that the World Cup reminds us that globalization is not always equal. Wealthier countries, major broadcasters, sponsors, organizations like FIFA have significantly more influence over how the World Cup is organized and presented, more so than much smaller groups or smaller countries, kind of a thing. And then I think for symbolic interactionism, symbols such as national flags, team jerseys, chants, and even viral social media moments allow fans worldwide to participate in common traditions while still expressing their own cultural identities. The World Cup becomes a global event because people collectively create meaning through these shared experiences. And it's a very cool thing to see. And I feel very lucky that we happen to be studying this right now, right when the World Cup is happening. And not only that, but it's happening, where we live, where we go about our daily lives. So it's cool to be able to see these concepts in practice.